Denis Cyplenkov has finally spoken out, responding directly to Devon Larratt's claims about the legacy hammer. And let's just say, his answer is going to shake things up. The legacy hammer, which has become the most talked about artifact in arm wrestling today, has sparked heated debates across the community. Everyone wants to know, what does it really represent? Why is it so significant? And the biggest question, who truly deserves to hold it? In this video, we'll uncover the real story behind the legacy hammer, an idea first introduced by Devon Larratt as a symbol of the strongest arm wrestler on the planet. From the right-hand hammer held by Devon Saganashvili to the left-hand hammer once given to Denis Cyplenkov, the hammer has become more than just a trophy. It's a piece of history. But with recent controversies surrounding who holds the hammer and how it should be passed on, things have gotten messy. Today, we'll break down Cyplenkov's response, Larratt's original intentions, and where the legacy of this hammer stands. You won't want to miss the details because this is more than just a rivalry. It's about who will define the future of arm wrestling history. The legacy hammer, an idea born from the mind of Devon Larratt, wasn't just created to be a simple trophy. It's more than a title or an award. It's a symbol of who is the strongest arm wrestler in the world, an artifact that carries the weight of the sport's history. But how did it all start? Larratt's idea was simple but powerful. He took a physical hammer and designated it as a prize for the strongest left and right-handed arm wrestler on the planet. The hammer itself isn't tied to any official league like WAL, World Arm Wrestling League, or East vs. West. It's a personal tradition. Whoever holds the hammer holds the title of the strongest, and their name is etched into the hammer, creating a lineage of champions. Devon's vision was that the legacy hammer would be passed down from one arm wrestling legend to another, establishing an unbroken chain of strength. But there's more to this than just holding the hammer. It's meant to represent a legacy, something that would outlive the individuals who hold it, allowing future generations to look back and see the greatest arm wrestlers of their time. But here's where things get tricky. While Larratt's idea sounds straightforward, the real question is, how do you decide who is the true holder of the hammer? Should it be based purely on wins? Or is there more to it, like honor, influence, and respect within the arm wrestling community? Larratt believed it should represent the strongest, but even that can be subjective. Is the strongest defined by the most recent victory? By long-term dominance? Or perhaps even by a wrestler's willingness to defend the hammer against all challengers? For Larratt, the hammer became more than just a physical object. It's a marker of history, and that's why he took it so seriously when he handed the left-handed hammer to Denis Cyplenkov. After all, when Devon lost to Devon Saganashvili at King of the Table in 2018, he passed the right-hand hammer to Devon, marking him as the strongest right-handed wrestler. But when it came to the left-hand side, Devon decided that Denis was the most worthy of holding that title. This decision wasn't made lightly. At the time, Denis was one of the most feared competitors in arm wrestling, known for his overwhelming power and unmatched strength, especially with his left arm. But with Devon's decision came a new level of responsibility, something that perhaps Denis wasn't fully aware of. When Larratt gave him the left-hand legacy hammer, it wasn't just a gift. It was a responsibility to the sport and its future. One of the most intriguing aspects of the legacy hammer is its flexibility. Devon made it clear that the hammer itself isn't the important part. It's the tradition and meaning behind it. He even told Denis that the hammer could be transformed into anything. It didn't have to remain a hammer. It could become a sword, an axe, or any symbol that represents strength in arm wrestling. The key, however, was that the names of the champions would continue to be etched into it, marking the line of those who held the title. This adaptability speaks volumes about the nature of the sport itself. Arm wrestling, like many sports, is constantly evolving. The promotion names may change, the formats may shift, but the spirit of competition, the desire to be the best, remains the same. That's why Devon's idea for the legacy hammer isn't tied to any organization. It transcends the current tournaments, leagues, and even the arm wrestlers themselves. It's an idea built for the future, a way to carry the legacy of the sport forward, long after today's champions have left the table. Now, when Devon passed the left-handed hammer to Denis, it came with unspoken expectations. To Devon, the hammer symbolized not only strength but also honor and responsibility. Denis was now a part of the hammer's lineage, and with that came the expectation to either defend it or pass it on when the time came. But here's where things got complicated. Denis might not have fully understood the depth of this tradition. There was a cultural and linguistic barrier that, according to some sources, might have led to a misunderstanding between Denis and Devon. While Devon believed that Denis should defend the hammer or pass it on when challenged by a worthy opponent, Denis seemed to treat the hammer as more of a personal gift, an honor given to him by Devon, not necessarily a title to be defended. This misunderstanding has been at the heart of the controversy surrounding the legacy hammer. Fans of the sport are divided. Some believe Denis should hold on to the hammer until he's ready to pass it on, while others feel that he should have already relinquished it to someone else, especially with rising competitors like Morozov making waves in the arm wrestling scene. And this brings us to the big question. What does the hammer really mean to the current generation of arm wrestlers? Is it just a symbolic gesture, or does it hold real weight in terms of determining the strongest arm wrestler? For some, the hammer represents a way to honor the past while keeping an eye on the future. It's a reminder of the greats who came before and the ones who will inevitably follow. But for others, it may be seen as just a relic, something that's more about tradition than actual competition. Denis Cyplenkov, known for his quiet and reserved personality, hasn't spoken much about his thoughts on the hammer in public, which only adds to the mystery. However, his response to Devon's recent comments suggests that he respects the idea, but might not be as invested in the concept as Devon is. To Denis, the hammer is a recognition of his past achievements, a symbol of what he accomplished during his peak, especially with his left arm, which was once considered one of the most dominant in the sport. But with Denis's current physical condition and the injuries he has faced, many wonder if he'll ever defend the hammer or pass it on. In the end, the legacy hammer is as much about the story it tells as it is about who holds it. It's a conversation piece, a symbol of honor, strength, and endurance. And while it's clear that Denis and Devon may see the hammer differently, one thing is certain. The arm wrestling community will continue to debate who deserves to hold this symbol of ultimate strength. The rivalry between Devon Larratt and Denis Cyplenkov is one that arm wrestling fans have followed for years. Both men are giants in the sport, each with their own strengths, style, and fan base. Devon Larratt, known for his charismatic personality and technical mastery, contrasts with Denis Cyplenkov, whose brute strength and quiet intensity have made him a fearsome competitor. Their encounters on and off the table have defined an era in arm wrestling. Their paths crossed in many matches, but the legacy hammer added a new layer to their dynamic. When Devon lost to Levon Saganashvili at King of the Table in 2018, he passed the right-hand legacy hammer to Levon. But when it came to the left-hand hammer, things took a different turn. Even though Denis hadn't directly faced Devon in that event, Devon made the decision to give the left-handed hammer to Denis, acknowledging him as the strongest left-handed arm wrestler at the time. It was a move that stunned fans, but it made sense. Denis's left arm was legendary. This handover, however, wasn't without controversy. Devon believed that by giving Denis the hammer, he was passing on a responsibility. Denis would now need to either defend the hammer or pass it on when the time came. But as we've seen, Denis didn't quite see it that way. To him, the hammer was more of a recognition of his past achievements, rather than a symbol he needed to actively defend. This difference in understanding has been a major point of tension between the two ever since. Devon's frustration became clear over time. While he didn't initially make a public issue of the legacy hammer, he has more recently expressed disappointment that Denis hasn't done more with it. From Devon's perspective, the hammer should be in circulation. It should continue to represent the strongest arm wrestler, and that means being passed on when someone else proves themselves worthy. Denis, however, hasn't made any moves to defend or relinquish the hammer, leading Devon to speak out. This disagreement boiled over in recent interviews and social media posts, where Devon openly questioned Denis's decision to hold onto the hammer without offering to defend it. In Devon's eyes, it was as if Denis was breaking the unspoken rules of the legacy hammer tradition. But Denis, with his quieter approach, hasn't engaged in the public back and forth as much, leaving fans to speculate about his true intentions. It's important to note that Denis's health has been a major factor in this situation. After suffering significant injuries and health issues, Denis hasn't been able to compete at the same level as before. His left arm, once the most feared in the sport, isn't what it used to be, and this might explain why he hasn't defended the hammer. Even so, this hasn't stopped the debates within the arm wrestling community. Some argue that Denis should pass the hammer on if he's not physically able to defend it, while others believe he has earned the right to hold onto it for as long as he chooses. This clash between Devon and Denis highlights a larger debate in arm wrestling. What does it mean to be the best? Is it about defending your title? Or is it enough to have reached the pinnacle once even if you can no longer compete at that level? For Devon, the hammer is something that should always be in the hands of the current strongest, someone who can continuously prove their dominance. For Denis, the hammer might represent a past achievement, something that reflects his legacy rather than his current ability. Despite their differences, both Devon and Denis have immense respect for each other. Denis has always acknowledged Devon's skill and accomplishments, and Devon has repeatedly praised Denis's unmatched strength, especially with his left hand. But the tension around the legacy hammer has created a unique divide between the two. As of now, the left-hand legacy hammer remains with Denis, and Devon continues to call for it to be put back into circulation. Whether Denis will defend it or eventually pass it on remains to be seen. What's clear is that the rivalry between these two giants of the sport isn't just about their physical strength. It's about their differing views on what it means to leave a lasting legacy in the sport of arm wrestling. The question of who truly deserves to hold the legacy hammer has become one of the most debated topics in arm wrestling today. With Denis Cyplenkov currently in possession of the left-hand hammer and Devon Saganashvili holding the right-hand hammer, fans and athletes alike are questioning the validity of who should possess these symbolic items. At the heart of the controversy is the notion of whether the hammer should remain with the holder indefinitely or if it should change hands based on current dominance in the sport. For Devon Larratt, the answer is clear. The hammer should go to the strongest arm wrestler, and that means someone who can actively defend it. In this view, the hammer isn't just a piece of memorabilia. It's a marker of who is the best at any given time, and it should be passed on to the next worthy competitor. But Denis Cyplenkov seems to see things differently. His take on the hammer appears to be more personal. To Denis, the hammer is a symbol of his past accomplishments, something he earned during his peak years, especially when his left arm was at its most dominant. But with injuries and his current physical condition limiting his ability to compete at the highest level, it's unlikely that Denis will defend the hammer anytime soon. This has led many to question whether it's time for Denis to pass it on to someone else. The big question is, who deserves it next? In arm wrestling, the strongest athletes often rise and fall quickly, making it difficult to pinpoint a clear heir to the hammer. One of the most talked about names in this discussion is Artem Morozov, a young and powerful arm wrestler who has been making waves in the sport recently. Many see Morozov as the next big thing, and some believe he's already earned the right to challenge Denis for the left-hand hammer. But without a direct challenge from Denis, the hammer remains out of reach for the time being. Another contender for the hammer could be Devon Saganashvili, who currently holds the right-hand hammer. Devon has been virtually unstoppable in recent years, dominating the sport with both hands. However, the tradition of the legacy hammer, as Devon intended it, is that the right and left hands should be kept separate, each with its own champion. While Devon's dominance with his right hand is undisputed, his left-hand performance has not been as widely tested, meaning the left-hand hammer could still be up for grabs by someone else. There's also the issue of how the hammer should be passed on. Should it be through formal competition, like a major tournament, or should it be done through one-on-one challenges, as was the case when Devon handed the hammer to Denis? Some argue that a formal event, perhaps something like King of the Table or East versus West, should be the setting for determining the next holder of the hammer. This would give the hammer a sense of legitimacy and structure, ensuring that it goes to the person who has proven themselves on the biggest stage. But others believe that the hammer should remain a personal tradition, passed on in private, just as it was when Devon gave it to Denis. After all, part of the mystique of the legacy hammer is that it exists outside of the official leagues and tournaments. It's a tradition created by the athletes, for the athletes, and keeping it within that realm allows it to remain special and separate from the politics of organized competition. One of the complications in all of this is the cultural and linguistic barrier between Denis and Devon. As we've seen, there was likely a misunderstanding when Devon gave the hammer to Denis, which could explain why Denis hasn't followed through with Devon's expectations to pass it on. It's possible that Denis sees the hammer as more of a personal memento, while Devon views it as a title that needs to be defended and passed on. This cultural gap has only fueled the debate further, with fans from different regions taking sides based on their understanding of the situation. Despite these complexities, there's no denying the emotional weight that the hammer carries. It represents not only strength but also legacy, the idea that the strongest arm wrestlers of each era will be remembered long after they've left the sport. For fans, seeing the hammer passed on from one great to another is a powerful symbol of the sport's continuity. But for the athletes involved, the hammer is more than just a symbol. It's a recognition of their hard work, their victories, and their contributions to the sport. So, who deserves the hammer? In the end, it may not come down to a single answer. The sport is constantly evolving, and new names are always emerging to challenge the old guard. Whether Denis decides to hold on to the hammer, pass it on to Morozov, or give it to someone else entirely, one thing is certain: the legacy hammer will continue to be a point of fascination and debate within the arm wrestling community. The most likely scenario is that the next contender will eventually step up, and Denis will be faced with a choice: defend the hammer or pass it on. Whether he chooses to face that challenge head-on or let the next generation take over will define not only the future of the hammer, but also how Denis's legacy is remembered in the sport. As arm wrestling continues to grow in popularity around the world, the future of the legacy hammer becomes a subject of increasing intrigue. The legacy hammer, while currently held by Denis Cyplenkov and Levon Saganashvili, represents something far bigger than any one individual. It's a symbol of excellence in the sport, an idea meant to stand the test of time. But what does the future hold for this unique tradition? As we've seen, the hammer was never intended to be static. Devon Larratt envisioned a future where the hammer would be passed from champion to champion, constantly evolving with the sport. But as the sport grows and new generations of arm wrestlers rise to prominence, there are questions about how this tradition can continue to thrive. One possibility is that the legacy hammer could evolve into something more formalized. As major events like King of the Table and East vs. West gain international attention, the hammer could be incorporated into these events, becoming an official part of the competition circuit. This would add structure and clarity to the process of determining who should hold the hammer, allowing fans to witness epic showdowns where the hammer is defended or passed on in real time. Imagine a massive, high-stakes match where the legacy hammer is on the line, a match that could cement an arm wrestler's place in history. On the other hand, there's something appealing about keeping the hammer a more personal tradition. Part of the charm of the legacy hammer is that it exists outside the constraints of leagues and organizations. It's a grassroots tradition, born from the respect arm wrestlers have for one another. Keeping it as a private, informal artifact allows it to remain separate from the commercial aspects of the sport, preserving its purity as a symbol of personal achievement. For the hammer to have a meaningful future, the question of how it should be passed on must be resolved. Should it remain with the current holder until they are challenged and defeated? Or should the hammer be passed on voluntarily, as Devon originally did? One thing is certain: if the hammer remains out of circulation for too long, it risks losing its significance. The longer Denis holds the left-hand hammer without defending it, the more the legacy of the hammer comes into question. Looking ahead, we could see new champions emerge to challenge for the hammer. Athletes like Artem Morozov are already showing the kind of dominance that could make them worthy of holding the hammer. As these young competitors rise, they may bring new life to the tradition, ensuring that the hammer continues to represent the pinnacle of arm wrestling achievement. Ultimately, the future of the legacy hammer will be determined by the athletes who carry on its tradition. Whether it becomes a formal prize in official tournaments or remains a personal symbol passed between champions, one thing is clear: the legacy hammer is here to stay, and its story is far from over. As the sport evolves, the hammer will continue to symbolize the very best in arm wrestling, representing not just physical strength, but the enduring legacy of those who shaped the sport.